Daniel Cross stood in the doorway of the cabin bedroom, staring at the single bed that would decide everything. 7 years. 7 years of pretending to hate the one woman he'd ever truly loved. 7 years of sacrifice for a marriage that, as he would discover in less than 24 hours, was already dead. His stepsister Evelyn stood on the opposite side of the room, her eyes carrying the same storm he'd been hiding since the day their parents said, "I do." Outside, winter screamed against the windows. Inside, the last wall was about to fall. If you're ready to witness a story about forbidden love, impossible choices, and the price of living a lie, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first time Daniel Cross lied about loving Evelyn Shaw, he was 23 years old and still believed that sacrifice was the same thing as strength. He remembered the exact moment, standing in his mother's kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, sunlight cutting through the curtains in golden strips, his mother's hand trembling slightly as she poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. She'd been alone for 6 years since his father died. 6 years of Daniel watching her eat dinner by herself. 6 years of hearing her footsteps echo through a house that used to be full of noise and argument and life. "I met someone," she'd said, not looking at him. "Richard Shaw. He's kind, Danny. He makes me laugh again." Daniel had smiled because that's what good sons did. He'd hugged her because he could feel how much she needed it, and he'd meant it when he said he was happy for her. What he hadn't known, what he couldn't have known, was that Richard Shaw had a daughter. And that daughter would walk into Daniel's life 3 weeks later and destroy every defense he'd ever built. Evelyn. Even her name felt dangerous in his mouth. She'd arrived at the engagement party in a dark green dress, her black hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than 21, more composed than she had any right to be. Daniel had been carrying a tray of appetizers his mother had insisted he pass around, playing the dutiful son, when Evelyn stepped through the front door and their eyes met across the crowded living room. The tray had nearly slipped from his hands. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that made him forget how to breathe properly. It was something else. Recognition, maybe. Like seeing someone you'd known in another life, in another version of the world where things were simpler. "You must be Daniel," she'd said when she finally crossed the room to him, extending her hand with a formal politeness that felt almost mocking. "I've heard a lot about you." "Nothing good, I hope," he'd replied, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. Her skin was warm. He'd held on a moment too long. She'd noticed. That was the beginning. The beginning of everything, and the beginning of the end. For 2 months, Daniel convinced himself it was nothing, a fleeting attraction. The kind of thing that happened when 2 strangers were thrown together by their parents' late-blooming romance. They saw each other at family dinners, at wedding planning sessions that seemed to multiply like bacteria. They were polite, cordial. They talked about safe things, books, music, the weather. But underneath every conversation was a current that pulled harder each time they spoke. Daniel would catch himself watching her across the table, noticing the way she tilted her head when she listened, the way her smile changed depending on who she was talking to. He learned that she was studying architecture, that she drank her coffee black, that she had a scar on her left wrist from falling off a bike when she was 9. He learned that when she laughed, really laughed, not the polite chuckle she gave his mother's jokes, it sounded like music he wanted to memorize. And Evelyn, for her part, seemed to be conducting her own careful study of him. "You're good at hiding," she told him once, late at night, at another family gathering. They'd both escaped to the back porch, seeking refuge from the cheerful chaos inside. Daniel had been leaning against the railing, staring at the stars, when she appeared beside him like a ghost. "Hiding what?" he'd asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. Everything. She'd looked at him then, really looked at him, in a way that made him feel transparent. "You smile and nod and play the perfect son, but I can see it. You're somewhere else. Always somewhere else." He'd wanted to tell her she was wrong. Instead, he'd said, "Maybe I just think too much." "Maybe," she'd agreed. "Or maybe you feel too much and you've gotten really good at pretending you don't." That conversation had haunted him for days, because she was right. Daniel had spent his entire life becoming a master of control. When his father died, he'd been 17, Old enough to understand that his mother was drowning in grief, young enough to believe he could save her by never burdening her with his own. So he'd learned to compress his emotions into something manageable, to smile when he wanted to scream, to nod when he wanted to argue, to disappear into himself whenever the world became too loud, too sharp, too real. It had worked. He'd put himself through college while living at home, had landed a decent job in consulting, had built a life that looked successful from the outside. He'd even dated, though none of those relationships had lasted longer than a few months. The women he met always seemed to sense that he was holding something back, that there was a part of him they'd never reach. They were right, because the part of himself Daniel had locked away wasn't available. It belonged to someone else now. It belonged to Evelyn. Bots. The night of the wedding, Daniel made a decision that would shape the next 7 years of his life. The ceremony had been small, intimate, just close family and friends gathered in a historic chapel on the edge of town. His mother had looked radiant in ivory silk, her eyes bright with happiness Daniel hadn't seen since before his father's diagnosis. Richard had cried during his vows, which had made Daniel's mother cry, which had set off a chain reaction of tears that left most of the guests dabbing at their eyes. Daniel had stood in the front row, watching his mother marry a man who clearly adored her and felt nothing but gratitude, until he'd glanced to the other side of the aisle and seen Evelyn staring at him. The reception was held at a rustic barn that had been transformed with string lights and wildflowers. There was dancing, champagne, speeches that ran too long, and stories that made everyone laugh. Daniel had kept his distance from Evelyn all evening, circulating through different conversations, playing his role. But gravity had other plans. They'd ended up on the same side of the barn, near the makeshift bar, reaching for drinks at the same moment. Their hands had brushed. Evelyn had pulled back like she'd been burned. "We need to talk," she'd said quietly, her voice nearly drowned out by the music. "About what?" "You know what." He did. He absolutely did. They'd slipped outside, away from the noise and the lights, walking until they found themselves in a field behind the barn where the grass was tall and the stars were infinite overhead. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence between them felt heavy, with all the words they'd been swallowing for months. Finally, Evelyn turned to face him. "This can't happen, Daniel." "I know. Our parents just got married. We're family now." "I know. So why does it feel like this?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and Daniel saw something in her expression that mirrored exactly what he'd been feeling: fear mixed with longing, resignation tangled with desperate hope. He'd stepped closer to her then, close enough to see the way the moonlight caught in her eyes, close enough to smell her perfume mixed with champagne. "I don't know," he'd admitted, "but I feel it too." "What are we going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? The question that had been building since the moment they met. Daniel had looked back toward the barn, where warm light spilled from the windows, and he could see the silhouettes of his mother and Richard dancing, pressed close, lost in their own world of hard-won happiness. And he'd made his choice. "We're going to bury it," he'd said. "Whatever this is between us, we're going to kill it. Because they deserve this. They deserve to be happy without us making it complicated." Evelyn's eyes had filled with tears. "How?" "We pretend. We act like we can't stand each other, keep our distance, make it convincing enough that no one ever suspects. You want us to fake hating each other? It's better than the alternative." "Which is what?" Daniel had reached up, almost touching her face, then stopped himself. "Destroying the only real happiness my mother's had in 6 years." Evelyn had closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her expression had changed, hardened, resolved. "Okay," she'd whispered. "We pretend." "Starting now?" "Starting now." And just like that, they'd walked back to the reception as different people. Evelyn had ignored him for the rest of the night. Daniel had done the same. When their parents had commented on how quiet the two of them were being, they'd both shrugged it off. "Just tired," Evelyn had said. "Long day," Daniel had agreed. Neither of them had mentioned that they were both dying inside. The performance became easier over time, which was the truly terrifying part. Within 6 months, Daniel and Evelyn had perfected the art of mutual disdain. At family dinners, they sat on opposite ends of the table. When forced to interact, their exchanges were clipped, barely civil. Evelyn developed a particular eye roll she reserved exclusively for Daniel's comments. Daniel mastered a dismissive tone that suggested he found her presence mildly irritating at best. Their parents noticed, of course. "I wish you two would make more of an effort," his mother said to him once, her voice tinged with disappointment. "Evelyn is family now." "We're civil," Daniel had replied, which was technically true. "Barely. You act like you can't stand each other." If only she knew how accurate and how completely backward that observation was. The worst part was the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays. Any occasion that brought the family together meant hours of maintaining the charade. Daniel became an expert at positioning himself in rooms so he'd never have to make eye contact with Evelyn for too long. She developed a sixth sense for knowing when he was about to enter a space and would suddenly find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. They were so good at avoiding each other that people stopped trying to force them together, which was exactly what they wanted, and exactly what was killing them. Everything changed on a random Thursday night in March, 2 years into the arrangement. Daniel had been working late at the office, staring at spreadsheets that had long since stopped making sense, when his phone rang. The hospital. His mother had collapsed at home, a minor stroke, the doctor assured him, but she'd need to stay overnight for observation. He'd driven 90 miles an hour to get there. Evelyn had beaten him by 5 minutes. She was standing in the waiting room when he arrived, her face pale, her hands shaking as she gripped a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee. When she saw him, something in her expression cracked. "She's stable," Evelyn said quickly. "They have her in a room. Richard's with her." Daniel had nodded, trying to process the information through the fog of panic. "Did they say what caused it?" "Stress. High blood pressure. They're running more tests." They'd stood there in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room, two people who'd spent 2 years perfecting distance, and neither of them knew what to do. Finally, Daniel had sat down in one of the plastic chairs. After a moment, Evelyn sat beside him, not across from him, not several seats away, right beside him. "I was so scared," she'd whispered. "When Richard called me, I thought, I know." He'd reached over and taken her hand without thinking. She'd gripped it like a lifeline. They'd sat like that for hours, waiting for updates, holding on to each other in the only way they were allowed, through crisis, through fear, through the temporary suspension of the rules they'd created. When Richard finally emerged to tell them his mother was asking for Daniel, Evelyn had let go of his hand slowly, reluctantly. "Go," she'd said. "I'll be here." Daniel had found his mother propped up in the hospital bed, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, tubes and monitors creating a web around her frail form. But her eyes were clear when she saw him. "Don't look so worried," she'd said, her voice weak but steady. "I'm not going anywhere yet." He'd pulled a chair close to her bedside, taking her hand. "You scared the hell out of me." "I scared myself." She'd squeezed his fingers. "Makes you think about things, about what matters. Rest matters. Getting better matters." "You know what I was thinking about when it happened?" She'd looked at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You. How you've been since the wedding." "Mom, you don't need to sit." "Hush. Let me talk." She'd taken a breath, wincing slightly. "You've been different, Danny. Distant. And I know you think I don't notice, but I'm your mother. I notice everything." Daniel's throat had tightened. "I'm fine." "You're not. And I think I know why." She'd paused, studying his face. "Evelyn?" His heart had stopped. "Mom, I see how you two avoid each other. How hard you both try to pretend you're strangers. And I've been lying to myself about why." Her eyes had filled with tears. "I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But lying in that ambulance, I realized, what if I died today? What if the last thing I did was force you into a situation where you had to hide who you really are? You didn't force anything, didn't I?" She'd gripped his hand harder. "I married Richard because I was lonely, because I wanted another chance at happiness, and I was so focused on what I wanted that I didn't stop to think about what it would do to you. You deserved to be happy. Not at your expense." A tear had slipped down her cheek. "Tell me the truth, Danny. Do you have feelings for her?" The question had hung in the air between them like smoke. Daniel could have lied, should have lied. That was the agreement. That was the whole point of the last 2 years. But sitting in that hospital room, watching his mother cry, feeling the weight of all the emotions he'd been compressing into silence, he couldn't do it anymore. Yes, he'd whispered. His mother had closed her eyes. And she feels the same? I think so. We haven't done anything. We made a choice to stay away from each other. For you, for Richard. Oh, Danny! She'd pulled him closer, pressing her forehead to his. What have I done to you? You fell in love. There's nothing wrong with that. And you buried your heart so I could have mine. She'd pulled back to look at him. That's not what parents are supposed to do to their children. I'm not a child anymore. I made my own choice. A choice you should never have had to make. They'd talked until the nurses kicked him out, until visiting hours were long over. His mother had made him promise to think about what she'd said, to consider telling the truth. Daniel had promised, knowing he wouldn't, because the truth was too dangerous. The truth would blow their carefully constructed family apart. But his mother's stroke changed something fundamental. Richard and his mother had started attending marriage counseling, not because their relationship was failing, but because the health scare had made them both want to strengthen what they had. They read books about blended families. They talked about communication, honesty, creating space for difficult conversations. They became better at being married, which only made Daniel and Evelyn better at hiding. But the cracks were starting to show. At Thanksgiving that year, Daniel's mother had assigned seating, putting Daniel and Evelyn right next to each other. It had been torture, sitting so close he could smell her perfume, feeling the warmth of her arm occasionally brushing his. Evelyn had barely eaten. Daniel had excused himself 3 times just to breathe. Later, when he was helping clear dishes, he'd found her alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkening sky. We can't keep doing this, she'd said without turning around. I know. It's getting harder. I know. What if... She'd turned to face him then, and the look in her eyes had nearly undone him completely. What if we just told them? Evelyn, I'm serious. What if we sat them down and explained? Maybe they'd understand. Or maybe it would destroy their marriage. Maybe my mother would blame herself. Maybe Richard would feel betrayed. Maybe it would turn into this ugly, complicated thing that ruins everything for everyone. So instead we ruin ourselves. Daniel hadn't had an answer for that. Because she was right. They were ruining themselves. Piece by piece, day by day, smile by fake smile. I can't be the reason my mother loses her happiness again, he'd finally said. I can't carry that. Evelyn had wiped at her eyes angrily. So I guess we just keep pretending. Unless you have a better idea. She'd looked at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through a dozen different emotions. Anger, resignation, sadness, something that looked dangerously close to love. I hate this, she'd whispered. Me too. And then his mother had walked into the kitchen, and they'd sprung apart like teenagers caught doing something forbidden, and the performance had continued. The years blurred together after that. Daniel threw himself into work, taking on more clients, longer hours, anything to keep his mind occupied. He dated occasionally, women who were perfectly nice, perfectly suitable, perfectly wrong. Every relationship ended the same way, with the woman telling him she didn't feel like he was really there, like part of him was always somewhere else. They weren't wrong. Evelyn finished her architecture degree and started working for a prestigious firm downtown. She dated too, and Daniel had to endure family dinners where he heard about her boyfriends, had to watch her smile when she talked about them, had to pretend he didn't want to flip the table every time she mentioned another man's name. They were living parallel lives, close enough to see each other, far enough apart to maintain the illusion. And then, 3 years after his mother's stroke, Daniel's entire world shifted again. Her name was Michelle. He'd met her at a charity fundraiser his company was sponsoring. She was smart, funny, easy to talk to. She worked in nonprofit management and had opinions about everything from city planning to the best pizza in town. When she laughed at his jokes, he didn't have to wonder if she meant it. She was exactly what he needed. Uncomplicated. They dated for 6 months before she told him she was pregnant. Daniel had stood in her apartment, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands, and felt his entire future rearrange itself in the span of a heartbeat. "I know this wasn't planned," Michelle had said, her voice shaking. "And I know we haven't talked about, we haven't been together that long, and if you don't want to—" "Stop." He'd taken her hands, the test still clutched between their palms. "Are you okay? Are you healthy?" "The doctor says everything looks good so far." "And what do you want?" She'd looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I want to keep it. I want this baby." "Then that's what we do." "You don't have to—" "Michelle." He'd pulled her into a hug, feeling her body shake against his. "We're going to do this. Together." They'd gotten married 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. No big celebration, no elaborate plans, just two people trying to do the right thing for a child who hadn't even been born yet. His mother had been thrilled. Richard had shaken his hand with genuine warmth. And Evelyn had stood in the back of the small gathering they'd held to celebrate the news, her face carefully neutral, and said all the right things. "Congratulations. I'm happy for you. You'll be a great father." Every word had felt like glass in his chest. Daniel's son, James, was born on a rainy Tuesday in October. He was perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute perfection. Tiny fingers, wisps of dark hair, a cry that sounded like the most important sound Daniel had ever heard. Holding his son for the first time, Daniel understood a kind of love he'd never experienced before. Fierce, protective, overwhelming in its totality. He also understood that his life was no longer his own. The marriage to Michelle had been an attempt at building something real, something stable, but cracks showed quickly. They were two people who'd rushed into forever for all the right reasons, but without the foundation to sustain it. Michelle wanted things Daniel couldn't give her: presence, full attention, emotional availability. The problem was that part of him was still locked away, still unavailable, still belonged to someone else. They'd tried. For James's sake, they'd really tried. But by the time their son turned 2, it was clear the marriage was dying, had maybe never really been alive to begin with. The divorce was quiet, amicable. Michelle got primary custody, Daniel got weekends and Wednesdays. They worked out a schedule. They promised to co-parent with respect, and Daniel became a single father navigating a world he barely understood. Parenting taught Daniel new dimensions of control, not the kind he'd practiced before, the self-erasure, the emotional compression. This was different. This was learning to be present while falling apart inside, learning to smile through exhaustion, learning to show up again and again, even when every part of him wanted to disappear. James became his anchor, his purpose, the reason Daniel got out of bed every morning. But being a single father also meant more family gatherings, more holidays, more forced interactions with Evelyn, who'd watched his marriage dissolve from a careful distance and never said a word about what she must have been feeling. She'd become an architect, designing beautiful buildings that appeared in magazines. She'd dated men who seemed perfect on paper, and she'd perfected the art of looking at Daniel like he was a stranger, except late at night when no one was watching, when they'd sometimes find themselves alone in a kitchen or on a porch or in a moment of accidental proximity. Then the mask would slip, just for a second, just long enough for Daniel to see that nothing had changed. She still felt it too. By the time James turned 5, Daniel had convinced himself he'd built a good life. Not the life he might have wanted in some alternate universe, but a good one nonetheless. He had his son. He had his work. He had family dinners where he could watch his mother laugh with Richard, could see that their marriage had survived and strengthened. The sacrifice had been worth it. That's what he told himself. That's what he needed to believe. And then came the invitation to the winter cabin. Richard owned a property in the mountains, a large rustic cabin he'd inherited from his father. Every few years he'd organize a family gathering there, a long weekend, everyone together, quality time. Daniel had managed to avoid the last 2 trips, citing work conflicts and James's school schedule, but this year his mother had called him personally. "Please come, Danny. James would love it. And I'd love to have everyone together." He'd heard something in her voice, a fragility he didn't like. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm fine, just getting older, wanting to make memories while I can." So he'd agreed. He'd packed bags for himself and James, loaded the car, and driven 4 hours into the mountains toward a weekend that would change everything. The cabin sat at the end of a winding road, surrounded by pine trees heavy with snow. It was bigger than Daniel remembered. 3 floors, stone fireplace, massive windows overlooking a frozen lake, beautiful in a way that felt almost threatening. Everyone else had arrived before them. Richard greeted them at the door, taking bags, showing James to the room he'd be sharing with his cousins. Daniel's mother hugged him tight, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. And then, from the kitchen, Evelyn had appeared. She looked the same, different, older, more guarded, beautiful. "Hello, Daniel." "Evelyn." They'd shaken hands like business associates, polite, professional, distant. James had saved them by demanding to see the lake, pulling Daniel away toward the windows. The first night passed in a blur of family dinner, board games, his mother's laughter. Daniel tucked James into bed, read him 3 stories, waited until his son's breathing deepened into sleep. Then he'd stood at the window of his room, staring out at the snow that had started falling, and wondered how he was going to survive 3 more days of this. The knock on his door came just past midnight. He'd opened it to find Richard standing there, his face apologetic. "I need a favor. The heating system in the East Wing just failed, some kind of valve issue. I've got a guy coming first thing in the morning, but tonight we need to consolidate rooms. Problem is, we're short on space." Daniel's stomach had dropped. "What do you need?" "Evelyn's room is in the East Wing. It's freezing, and the only available room is—" "No. I know you two don't get along, but it's just one night. The room has 2 beds. You won't even have to talk to each other." But when Daniel opened the door to the room Richard had assigned them to, there was only 1 bed, a queen-sized bed. 1 bed. And outside, the snow was falling harder, the wind picking up, the storm the weather service had warned about finally arriving with brutal efficiency. Evelyn appeared in the doorway behind him, carrying her overnight bag, her expression carefully blank. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. "The heating's out in your wing." I gathered that. She'd looked at the bed, then at Daniel, then back at the bed. Richard said there were 2 beds. Richard was wrong. They'd stood there in the hallway, 2 people who'd spent 7 years perfecting distance, staring at the impossible situation they'd been handed. "I can sleep on the floor," Daniel had finally said. "Don't be ridiculous, it's freezing." "Then what do you suggest?" Evelyn had walked past him into the room, dropping her bag on the chair. "We're adults. We can share a bed for 1 night without the world ending." "Evelyn? What?" She'd turned to face him, and for the first time in years he'd seen real anger in her eyes. "What are you afraid of, Daniel? That after 7 years of pretending, 1 night in the same room is going to break us?" He'd wanted to tell her, yes, exactly that. Instead, he'd picked up his bag and walked into the room, closing the door behind him. The last wall was about to fall, and neither of them was ready for what would happen when it did. The silence in the room was so thick Daniel could feel it pressing against his skin. Evelyn had moved to the far side of the bed, her back to him, methodically unpacking her overnight bag with movements that were too controlled, too precise. Daniel stood near the door, still holding his own bag, trying to figure out how to navigate the next 8 hours without losing his mind. Outside, the wind howled. The old cabin creaked and settled around them. He could hear muffled voices from downstairs, Richard and his mother probably making hot chocolate, laughing about something. Normal family sounds, a universe away from the tension crackling in this room. "Are you going to stand there all night?" Evelyn asked without turning around. "Because if you are, I'm taking the whole bed." Daniel forced himself to move. He set his bag on the dresser, pulled out his toiletries with hands that weren't quite steady. "I'll take the left side." "Fine. And I'll put pillows between us." That made her turn around. Her expression was unreadable. "Pillows. It'll create a barrier." "A barrier?" She said it like the word tasted wrong in her mouth. "Yes, Daniel, pillows will definitely solve 7 years of—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. 7 years of what? "Nothing. Forget it." She grabbed her toiletry bag. "I'm taking the bathroom first." She disappeared behind the bathroom door before he could respond. Daniel heard the water run, heard her moving around, and stood there in the middle of the room feeling like he was 17 years old again, uncertain and off balance and completely out of his depth. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. He should have trusted his instincts, should have invented another excuse, should have protected himself and Evelyn from exactly this situation. But his mother's voice on the phone, that fragility, that plea, he couldn't have said no. The bathroom door opened. Evelyn emerged in flannel pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair down now, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. She looked younger like this, softer. Daniel made himself look away. "All yours," she said, climbing into bed and immediately turning toward the wall. Daniel grabbed his things and escaped into the bathroom. He took his time, brushed his teeth twice, washed his face, stared at his reflection in the mirror, and tried to give himself a pep talk that sounded pathetic even in his own head. "You can do this. It's just one night. You've survived worse." Except he wasn't sure he had survived worse. 7 years of avoiding her, 7 years of careful distance, and now he was supposed to sleep 18 inches away from the one person who'd lived in his head every single day since his mother's wedding. When he finally ran out of excuses to stay in the bathroom, he turned off the light and walked back into the bedroom. Evelyn was still facing the wall, her breathing even, but not quite deep enough to be asleep. Daniel climbed into bed, staying as close to his edge as physics would allow. He'd grabbed the extra pillows from the chair and constructed a small wall down the center of the mattress. It felt ridiculous. It felt necessary. He turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight filtered through snow-heavy clouds. "Good night," he said to the ceiling. Silence. Then, "Good night, Daniel?" Her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it, but he did. And the sound of his name in her mouth after years of careful avoidance hit him like a physical blow. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. It was going to be a very long night. Yes, Daniel wasn't sure how much time had passed when Evelyn spoke again. An hour, maybe less. He'd been lying there in the dark, listening to the storm intensify outside, very much not sleeping. "Are you awake?" she asked. "Yes." "I can't sleep." "Neither can I." Another silence. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the cabin, a door slammed. "This is ridiculous," Evelyn said. "We're lying here in the dark pretending we don't know each other, pretending we're strangers. It's safer." "Safer than what?" Daniel didn't answer. He heard her shift position, felt the mattress move as she rolled over. Now she was facing him, though he couldn't see her in the darkness. "Talk to me," she said. "Please. I'm so tired of the silence." "What do you want me to say?" "Anything. Something real. Something that's not part of the performance." Daniel stared at the ceiling, his heart hammering. "I don't know how to do that anymore." "Yes, you do." Her voice was closer now. Had she moved? "You're doing it right now." He turned his head toward her, his eyes adjusting enough to make out the shape of her face in the darkness. She'd propped herself up on one elbow. Even in shadow, she was devastating. "How's James?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "He's good. Great. He's everything." "I can tell. The way you look at him. It's beautiful, Daniel." "He saved me," Daniel admitted. "When Michelle and I split, when everything fell apart, James gave me a reason to keep going." "I'm sorry about your marriage." "Don't be. It was never going to work." "Why not?" "Because I was in love with someone else. Because I've been in love with someone else since the moment I met her. Because every woman I've ever dated was just a shadow of you." But he couldn't say that, couldn't cross that line. "Michelle deserved better than half of me," he said instead. "She deserved someone who could give her everything." "And you couldn't?" "No." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where was the other half?" Daniel's breath caught. She knew. Of course she knew. "Evelyn?" "Never mind. Forget I asked." She started to roll back over, but Daniel caught her arm before she could. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't pretend you don't know the answer." Her skin was warm under his hand. He could feel her pulse, rapid and uneven. In the darkness, they were just shapes, just voices, Just two people who'd been running from the truth for far too long. Daniel, let go. Do you want me to? That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. His grip on her arm loosened but didn't release. We buried ourselves for 7 years. We erased who we were for people who never asked us to. And for what? For them. For their happiness. Are they happy, Evelyn? Really happy? Or are they just two people who got married because they were lonely and afraid of dying alone? That's cruel. It's honest. Look, he finally let go of her arm, but she didn't move away. My mother had a stroke. She almost died. And in that hospital room, she told me she knew about us, about how we felt. He heard Evelyn's sharp intake of breath. What? She said she'd been lying to herself, ignoring what was obvious because she wanted her happiness more than she wanted mine. When was this? 5 years ago. 5 years? Evelyn's voice rose. You've known for 5 years that she knew and you never told me? What would have been the point? It didn't change anything. Didn't change. She sat up fully now, and Daniel could see her silhouette, rigid with anger. It changed everything, Daniel. Everything. We've been hiding from people who already knew. We've been performing for an audience that saw through us years ago. She asked me if I had feelings for you. I told her yes. And then she told me to think about telling the truth, about not burying myself anymore. And I looked at her in that hospital bed, so fragile, so breakable, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't risk destroying what she'd built with Richard. So you just kept going, kept pretending. Yes. And then you married Michelle. Yes. Did you love her? The question hit like a blade between the ribs. I tried to, Daniel said quietly. I really tried. She was good and kind, and she deserved everything. And when she told me she was pregnant, I thought maybe this was my second chance. Maybe I could build something real with her. Maybe I could finally let go of what? You know what? Evelyn made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Say it, for once in 7 years, just say it. Evelyn, say it, Daniel. He sat up, the pillow barrier between them now a joke, an absurdity. They were close enough that he could see her eyes shining in the darkness, could see the tears on her cheeks. I never let go of you, he said. Not for a single day. Not for a single moment. You think I don't know how pathetic that is? You think I don't hate myself for it? I married someone else. I had a child. I built an entire life. And through all of it, every single second, you were there, in my head, in my chest, like a wound that never healed. Evelyn's hands came up to cover her face. Her shoulders shook. I dated so many people, she said through her tears. Good men. Men who wanted to marry me. Men who would have given me everything. And I couldn't. Every time they got too close, every time they started talking about futures and forevers, I found a reason to run. Because none of them were, don't. None of them were you. The words hung between them like a confession and an accusation all at once. Daniel reached for her without thinking, pulling her hands away from her face, holding them in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling. We can't do this, he said, even as every part of him screamed the opposite. I know. If we cross this line, I know, Daniel. James, I have to think about James. What it would do to him. What it would do to the family. I know. But neither of them let go. Outside, the storm had reached its peak. Wind hammered against the cabin. Snow piled against the windows. The world was erasing itself in white, and inside this room, 7 years of carefully constructed walls were crumbling. I'm so tired, Evelyn whispered. I'm so tired of being strong, of pretending, of watching you from across rooms and acting like you're nothing to me. Evelyn, do you know what it was like? Watching you marry her? Standing in that room while everyone celebrated and knowing I had no right to feel what I was feeling? No right to be angry or hurt or devastated? I know. Do you? Do you really? Because from where I stood, it looked like you moved on. Like you found someone else and built something real. And I was stuck, frozen, still waiting for something that was never going to happen. Daniel pulled her closer until their foreheads were touching, until he could feel her breath against his lips. I never moved on, he said. I tried. God, I tried. But I never stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Evelyn's hands came up to frame his face, her thumbs brushing across his cheekbones, and Daniel felt something inside him break open. 7 years. 7 years of wanting and denying and suffering in silence. "Tell me to stop," she breathed. "Tell me this is wrong and we need to go back to pretending." "I can't. Daniel, I can't tell you to stop because I don't want you to stop. I haven't wanted you to stop since the moment I met you." Her lips found his in the darkness. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was 7 years of starvation, of denial, of every conversation they'd never had and every touch they'd never allowed. Daniel kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Evelyn kissed him back like she was trying to memorize the shape of his mouth, the taste of his tongue, the feeling of his hands in her hair. They fell back against the mattress, the pillow barrier scattering. Evelyn's fingers twisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, impossibly closer. Daniel's hands mapped the curve of her spine, the slope of her shoulders, 7 years of imagined geography, finally real under his palms. "We shouldn't," Evelyn gasped against his mouth. "I know. This doesn't solve anything. I know. Tomorrow we'll have to face— I know." He kissed her again, swallowing whatever she was going to say next. "I know, Evelyn, I know all of it, and I don't care." That was a lie. He did care. He cared about James, about his mother, about Richard, about the fallout that would come from this. He cared about all of it. But right now, in this moment, with Evelyn in his arms after 7 years of exile, he couldn't make himself stop. They kissed until their lips were swollen, until breathing became difficult, until the heat between them was unbearable. Daniel's hands found bare skin where her sweatshirt had ridden up. Evelyn made a sound low in her throat that drove him absolutely insane. "Wait," she said suddenly, pulling back. "Wait, Daniel, we need to think about this." He forced himself to stop, to pull away, to put space between them even though it felt like tearing off his own skin. They lay there in the darkness, both breathing hard, both trembling. "You're right," he managed. "You're absolutely right. If we do this, if we cross this line completely, there's no going back. I know. Your son, my career, our parents' marriage, everything gets complicated. Everything's already complicated, Evelyn. We've been living in complicated for 7 years." She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. Daniel could see her profile in the faint moonlight, the line of her nose, the curve of her lips that he could still feel against his own. "What do you want?" she asked. "If there were no consequences, if we lived in a world where we could just be together, what would you want?" The question was so simple and so impossible all at once. "You," Daniel said. "I'd want you. I'd want mornings where I wake up next to you. I'd want to introduce you to James as someone who matters, someone permanent. I'd want family dinners where I don't have to pretend I can't see you. I'd want a life that's real instead of this half-existence we've been suffering through." Evelyn turned her head to look at him. "That's what I want too. But we can't have it, can't we?" "You know we can't." "Do I?" She shifted onto her side, facing him fully. "Your mother already knows. She's known for 5 years. What if we just told everyone? What if we stopped hiding?" "Evelyn, what if the explosion we're so afraid of isn't as bad as we think? What if they understand? What if they don't?" Daniel interrupted. "What if Richard feels betrayed? What if my mother blames herself for putting us in this position? What if their marriage falls apart because of us? You don't know that would happen. I don't know it wouldn't." They stared at each other in the darkness. The impossible situation stretched between them like barbed wire. Finally, Evelyn reached out and took his hand. "Tell me something true." "What?" "Something you've never said out loud. Something real." Daniel intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling the rightness of it, the way their hands fit together like they'd been designed for exactly this. "I think about you every day," he said quietly. "Every morning when I wake up. Every night before I sleep. When I'm with James, I imagine what it would be like if you were there too. When I'm at work, I wonder what you're designing, what building you're bringing to life. I've memorized the sound of your voice, The way you laugh when something genuinely surprises you versus the polite laugh you use in crowds. I know you drink your coffee black. I know you have a scar on your left wrist. I know you hate mushrooms and love thunderstorms and cry during sad movies even though you pretend you don't. Evelyn's breath hitched. How do you know all that? Because I pay attention, even when I'm pretending not to. Even when we're in the same room and I'm looking everywhere except at you, I'm still seeing you. I've always been seeing you. She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. I have a folder on my computer. Architectural designs I've never shown anyone. They're houses, Daniel. Dream houses. And every single one of them has a room designed for a child. For James. I designed these spaces imagining what he'd need, what would make him happy. I've never even had a real conversation with your son, and I've designed him a dozen bedrooms. Daniel felt something crack in his chest. Evelyn, I'm in love with you, she said. Simple, direct, devastating. I've been in love with you since before I even knew what that meant. And I've spent 7 years trying to kill it, trying to bury it, trying to convince myself it was just infatuation or proximity or something that would fade. But it never faded. It just grew roots, deeper and deeper, until it became part of who I am. Daniel pulled her close again, wrapping his arms around her, pressing his face into her hair. She fit against him perfectly. Like every other person he'd ever held had been practiced for this exact moment. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I love you, and it's ruined me for everyone else. They held each other in the darkness, the storm raging outside, their hearts hammering inside. 7 years of denial, 7 years of sacrifice. And finally, the truth spoken out loud. But truth didn't solve anything. Truth just made the impossible situation more painful. They must have fallen asleep like that, wrapped around each other, because Daniel woke to gray morning light filtering through the windows and Evelyn's head on his chest, her arm draped across his waist. For one perfect moment, he let himself have it. Let himself feel what it was like to wake up next to her. Let himself imagine this was his life, his morning, his future. Then reality crashed back in. James would be awake soon. The family would be gathering for breakfast. They'd have to go downstairs and face everyone and pretend last night never happened. Evelyn stirred against him, her eyes opening slowly. She looked up at him, and for a second she smiled. A real smile. The kind he'd never seen her give him before. Then she remembered too. Oh, she said softly. Yeah. She sat up, running her hands through her hair. Daniel, A knock on the door made them both freeze. Daniel, you awake? Richard's voice. Heating's back on in the east wing. I wanted to let Evelyn know she can move back to her room. Daniel looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back. Just a minute, Daniel called out. They heard Richard's footsteps retreat down the hallway. Evelyn climbed out of bed, immediately putting distance between them. She started gathering her things, shoving them into her bag with jerky, agitated movements. Evelyn, we should talk about what happens now, she said without looking at him. We should figure out, I don't know what happens now. That made her stop. She turned to face him, her expression raw. So we just go back to pretending, after everything we said last night? I don't know, Daniel repeated. I need to think about James, about what's best for him. And what about what's best for you, for us? There is no us, Evelyn, not in any way that matters, not in any way that can exist in the real world. She flinched like he'd slapped her. Right, of course. The real world, where you're a single father and I'm your stepsister and we pretend we don't... She stopped, pressing her fingers to her eyes. I need to go. Evelyn, wait. But she was already grabbing her bag, already heading for the door. Thank you for sharing the room, she said, her voice carefully neutral, the performance sliding back into place like armor. I hope you and James enjoy the rest of the weekend. She was gone before he could respond. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, feeling like he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. Or maybe the worst mistake had been 7 years ago, when they'd decided to bury the truth in the first place. Breakfast was torture. James sat next to Daniel, chattering about the snow fort he and his cousins were planning to build. His mother served pancakes and asked about everyone's sleep. Richard talked about getting the heating fixed permanently. and Evelyn sat at the opposite end of the table, not looking at Daniel even once. The performance was back. Perfect. Flawless. Except Daniel could still feel her in his arms, could still hear her voice saying, "I love you," in the darkness. "You okay, Danny?" his mother asked. "You look tired." "Didn't sleep well," he said. "Storm kept me up." His mother gave him a look that suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she didn't push. After breakfast, Daniel took James outside to play in the snow. His son's laughter should have been enough to center him, to remind him what mattered. And it did matter. James mattered more than anything. But as he watched his son build a snowman, he found himself thinking about what Evelyn had said, about the room she'd designed for a child she'd never really met, about the future she'd imagined that could never exist. "Daddy, you're not helping," James complained. "Sorry, buddy." Daniel knelt down, packing snow. "What do we need?" "Arms. The snowman needs arms." They found sticks and constructed a lopsided snowman that James declared was perfect. And Daniel smiled and agreed and tried not to think about the woman inside the cabin who was probably packing her things right now, probably preparing to leave early, probably hating him. He didn't blame her. He kind of hated himself too. Yet, that afternoon, while James napped, Daniel found himself alone on the back porch. The storm had passed. The sky was that crystalline blue that only happened after heavy snow. Everything looked clean, new, like the world had been reset. If only it were that simple. "Can we talk?" He turned to find his mother standing in the doorway, bundled in her heavy coat. "Sure, Mom." She came to stand beside him at the railing, both of them looking out at the white landscape. "Evelyn's leaving," she said. "She said something came up with work, but I don't think that's true." Daniel didn't respond. "What happened between you two?" "Nothing." "Daniel." He gripped the railing harder. "We shared a room last night. We talked. That's all." "What did you talk about?" "Everything. 7 years of everything." "The past," he said carefully. "The choices we made." His mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "I've been talking to my therapist about you and Evelyn." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "What?" "Don't look so shocked. You think I don't notice? You think I haven't watched you two torture yourselves for 7 years?" She shook her head. "I tried to bring it up with you in the hospital, but you shut down. And I let you because I was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of losing you or Richard or this family we built." "Mom, let me finish." She took a breath. "My therapist asked me something that's been haunting me ever since. She asked, what kind of mother asks her child to sacrifice their happiness for hers? And I didn't have a good answer, Danny, because the truth is, I'm not supposed to. You're supposed to live your life, find your happiness, and I'm supposed to support that, even when it's complicated." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "It's not your fault." "Isn't it? I married Richard knowing you and Evelyn, knowing there was something there. I saw it at the engagement party. I saw the way you looked at each other. And I told myself it was nothing, that you were adults who'd figure it out. But really, I was just choosing to be blind because I wanted my second chance." "You deserved that second chance." "Not at your expense?" She turned to face him fully. "Tell me the truth. Are you in love with her?" The question Daniel had been avoiding for 7 years. "Yes," he whispered. His mother closed her eyes. "And she loves you?" "Yes." "Then why are you standing here? Why isn't she?" "Because it's complicated. Because there's James and Richard and you and the family and you're using all of us as an excuse to stay safe," his mother interrupted. "You're hiding behind responsibility and sacrifice because being honest is terrifying." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. You've been doing it your whole life, Danny. Since your father died, you've been the one who holds everything together, the one who takes care of everyone else, the one who never asks for anything. And I've let you because it was easier, but I can't let you do this anymore." Daniel felt something inside him crumble. "What do you want me to do, Mom? She's Richard's daughter. She's my stepsister. She's the woman you love. And in a week, Richard and I are getting divorced." The world stopped. Daniel stared at his mother, certain he'd misheard. "What?" We're getting divorced, she repeated, her eyes filling with tears. The papers are already filed. We've been seeing lawyers for 3 months. But how? Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted one last weekend, one last family gathering before everything changed, before I had to admit that my second chance at happiness wasn't what I thought it would be. Daniel grabbed the railing to steady himself. I don't understand. Richard and I care about each other. We do. But we're not in love. We haven't been for a while. We got married because we were lonely, because we wanted companionship. But that's not enough to build a life on. We've been trying to make it work, trying to force something that just isn't there, and finally, we both admitted it. The marriage is over. 7 years. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of burying his heart for a marriage that was already dying. You knew, Daniel said slowly. You knew when you called me about this trip, when you asked me to come. You knew you were getting divorced. Yes. And you didn't think to mention it. I was going to tell everyone this weekend, tonight, actually, at dinner. She reached for his hand. But then I saw you and Evelyn this morning, the way you were both so carefully not looking at each other, and I realized you still don't know that you're free. Free. The word felt foreign. How long? Daniel asked. How long have you known the marriage wasn't working? A year, maybe, but we've been growing apart for longer than that. So all this time, all these years that Evelyn and I have been sacrificing yourselves for nothing, his mother finished. Yes. Daniel turned away from her, his hands gripping his hair. He thought he might scream, or laugh, or break something. 7 years. 7 goddamn years. Where is she? He asked. Where's Evelyn? Packing. She's planning to leave within the hour. Daniel was moving before he'd made a conscious decision, pushing past his mother, heading back into the cabin. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering, his mind racing. He found Evelyn in her room in the east wing, zipping up her suitcase. Don't go, he said from the doorway. She looked up, startled. Daniel. They're getting divorced, my mother and Richard. The marriage is over. Evelyn's face went white. What? She just told me. They've been planning it for months. The papers are filed. It's done. But how, when... Daniel crossed the room to her, taking her hands. We spent 7 years burying ourselves for a marriage that was already failing. 7 years, Evelyn. We gave up everything for nothing. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't understand. Neither do I. But I know I'm done pretending. I'm done hiding. I'm done sacrificing what I want because I'm afraid of what other people will think. Daniel, your son, deserves a father who's honest, who shows him that love doesn't have to be hidden or sacrificed, who teaches him that sometimes the brave thing is telling the truth, even when it's complicated. Evelyn was crying fully now, her shoulders shaking. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her while she broke apart. I can't do this again, she sobbed against his chest. I can't hope and then have it ripped away. I know. If we try this, if we're actually together and it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But at least we'll know. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if. She pulled back to look at him, her face streaked with tears. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I've wasted 7 years and I don't want to waste another day. I'm saying yes to us, to whatever that means, to however complicated it gets. Your family will deal with it, or they won't. But I'm done letting other people's opinions control my life. Evelyn searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she rose up on her toes and kissed him. Not like last night, desperate and hungry. This was different, softer, like a promise, like a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn was smiling through her tears. So what now? Now we go downstairs. We sit through whatever announcement my mother and Richard are planning to make, and then we tell them about us. Just like that? Just like that. What about James? I'll talk to him, explain it in a way he can understand. He's 5, but he's smart, and he deserves the truth. Evelyn took a shaky breath. I'm terrified. Me too. But you're sure? Daniel thought about the last 7 years, about every family dinner spent avoiding her, about every night lying awake imagining a different life, about his marriage to Michelle that had been doomed from the start because his heart belonged to someone else, about waking up this morning with Evelyn in his arms and feeling, for the first time in 7 years, like he could breathe. "I'm sure," he said. And finally, after 7 years of living a lie, Daniel Cross meant it. They stood in Evelyn's room for another moment, hands intertwined, both trying to steady their breathing. The enormity of what they'd just decided hung in the air between them like electricity before a lightning strike. "We should go down," Daniel said, though he made no move toward the door. "In a minute." Evelyn squeezed his hands tighter. "I just need one more minute where it's just us, before we step into whatever chaos is waiting downstairs." Daniel understood. In this room, they were just two people who'd finally stopped running from the truth. Downstairs, they'd become a scandal, a complication, a source of family drama that would ripple through every relationship they had. But there was no going back now. The wall had fallen, and Daniel was done trying to rebuild it. "Okay," he said softly. "One more minute." Evelyn stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her body against his. 7 years he'd wanted this. 7 years of denying himself the simple comfort of holding her. Never again. "I love you," she whispered. "I need you to know that before we go down there. Before everyone has their opinions and their judgments. I love you, and nothing they say is going to change that." "I love you too." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Whatever happens, we face it together." She looked up at him, her eyes still red from crying, but clear now, determined. "Together." They kissed once more, slow and deliberate, like sealing a pact. Then Evelyn pulled away, wiped her face, and picked up her suitcase. "I guess I won't be needing this anymore," she said, setting it back down. Daniel managed a smile. "Probably not." They walked down the hallway side by side, not touching but close enough that their arms brushed. Every step felt weighted with consequence. Daniel could hear voices from the main floor. His mother, Richard, some of the other family members who'd come for the weekend. Normal conversation, laughter. That was about to change. When they reached the top of the stairs, Daniel paused. "Wait, let me check on James first. I want to make sure he's okay before everything." Evelyn nodded. "I'll go help with dinner prep. Give you some time." "Thank you." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture so small and yet so significant after 7 years of maintaining careful distance. Then she headed downstairs while Daniel went to find his son. James was in the family room with his cousins, building an elaborate structure out of blocks. His face lit up when he saw Daniel. "Daddy, look what we made! It's a castle!" Daniel crouched down beside him, examining the tower of blocks that was definitely leaning at an unsafe angle. "That's amazing, buddy. You're really good at building things." "Like Aunt Evelyn," James said brightly. "She builds buildings, real ones. She told me at Thanksgiving." Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't known they'd talked. "She did?" "Yeah," she said, "maybe when I'm bigger she'll show me her designs." James added another block to the precarious tower. "She's nice, Daddy. I don't know why you always look mad when she's around." Out of the mouths of children. "I'm not mad at her," Daniel said carefully. "I never was." "Then how come you never talked to her?" How to explain 7 years of complicated history to a 5-year-old? "Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be," Daniel said. "But I'm going to try to do better, okay?" "Okay." James seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back to his building, tongue poking out in concentration. Daniel watched his son play and felt the weight of what he was about to do settle more firmly on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him and Evelyn anymore. Every choice he made would affect James. Every conversation, every revelation, every consequence. But he thought about what his mother had said, about teaching his son that love didn't require self-erasure, about showing James what honesty looked like, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "I love you, James," Daniel said, ruffling his son's hair. "Love you too, Daddy." James didn't look up from his blocks. "Can we have hot chocolate later?" "Sure, buddy, whatever you want." Daniel stood and headed back toward the kitchen, his heart pounding harder with each step. The kitchen was full of activity when he arrived. His mother was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like marinara sauce. Richard was chopping vegetables. Evelyn stood at the counter, slicing bread, her movements careful and controlled. When she saw Daniel, something flickered in her expression. Fear, maybe. Or hope. Or both. "Danny, perfect timing," his mother said without turning around. Can you set the table? We're doing family style tonight." "Sure, Mom." He moved through the kitchen, gathering plates and silverware, hyper-aware of Evelyn's presence just a few feet away. Their hands brushed when they both reached for napkins at the same time. The contact sent a jolt through him that he felt all the way to his spine. Richard was watching them. Daniel met his eyes and saw something there he couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Understanding? It was impossible to tell. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a minute?" Richard said, setting down his knife. "Outside?" Every muscle in Daniel's body tensed. "Of course." They walked out onto the back porch, the same place Daniel had stood with his mother just hours earlier. The sun was starting to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. Richard leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "Your mother told you about the divorce." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Daniel said. "She told me this afternoon. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. We were planning to tell everyone tonight at dinner, but I suppose the cat's out of the bag now." "It's okay. I'm sorry it didn't work out." Richard smiled sadly. "So am I. Your mother is a wonderful woman, but wonderful doesn't always equal compatible." He was quiet for a moment, studying the sunset. "I think we both knew it wasn't right. We just didn't want to admit we'd failed." "You didn't fail. You tried." "We did, and now we're trying something else. Honesty." Richard turned to look at Daniel directly. "Which brings me to what I really wanted to talk to you about." Daniel's stomach dropped. "I'm not blind, Daniel. I know there's something between you and Evelyn I've known for a long time." The admission hung in the cold air. "Richard, let me finish." Richard held up a hand. "When your mother and I first got together, I hoped that you and Evelyn would become friends. Maybe even close, like real siblings. But that's not what happened, is it?" Daniel couldn't find words. "Instead, you both went to opposite corners and stayed there for 7 years. And I told myself you just didn't get along, that some people are oil and water, that it was fine." Richard shook his head. "But I saw the way you looked at her when you thought no one was watching. I saw the way she'd leave rooms when you entered them. And I realized you weren't avoiding each other because you didn't care. You were avoiding each other because you cared too much. I never meant to." "I know, neither did she. These things happen. Hearts don't ask permission." Richard sighed. "I talked to Evelyn about it once, about 2 years ago. Asked her directly if there was something between you two. She denied it, very convincingly, but I could see the truth in her eyes." Daniel gripped the porch railing. "We never acted on it. Not until last night. We agreed, the night of your wedding, that we'd bury it, that you and my mother deserved your happiness without us complicating things." "That's what I was afraid of." Richard's voice was heavy. "You sacrificed 7 years of your life for a marriage that was already doomed. You both did." "We didn't know it was doomed. Didn't you? Be honest, Daniel. When you looked at us, really looked at us, did you see a couple in love? Or did you see two lonely people keeping each other company?" The question cut deep because it was fair, because even through the haze of his own denial, Daniel had sensed it. The way his mother and Richard functioned more like roommates than spouses. The way their conversation stayed surface level, pleasant but never deep. The way they could go days without really seeing each other. "I wanted to believe," Daniel said quietly. "So did we." Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "But wanting isn't enough, which is why we're ending it. Before we waste more years pretending." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last of the daylight fade. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "With us. With the family. That's up to you and Evelyn. The divorce will be final in a few months. After that, legally, you won't be related to her at all." Richard met his eyes. "And even before that, even now, I'm not going to stand in your way. I love my daughter, Daniel. I want her to be happy. And if you're the one who makes her happy, then I'm not going to let some technicality about paperwork stop that. The relief that washed over Daniel was so intense it was almost painful. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There will be people who have opinions, who think it's weird or wrong or inappropriate. You'll have to deal with that. I know. And there's James to think about. How you explain this to him. How you integrate Evelyn into his life in a way that doesn't confuse or hurt him. I know, Daniel repeated, but I'm ready to deal with it. We both are. Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because my daughter has been miserable for 7 years, and I'd very much like to see her smile again. They went back inside to find dinner almost ready. The table had been set, extended to accommodate all the family members who'd gathered for the weekend. It looked beautiful. Candles, good dishes, the kind of spread that suggested celebration. Except tonight wasn't going to be a celebration. Tonight was going to be a reckoning. Daniel's mother called everyone to dinner. James ran in from the family room with his cousins, all of them chattering about their block castle. Aunts and uncles filed in, finding their seats, and Evelyn appeared from the hallway, her eyes finding Daniel's across the crowded room. He tried to send her a message with his expression. It's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. She gave him the smallest nod in return. They all sat down. His mother said a few words about being grateful for family, for time together, for second chances. Richard poured wine for the adults, juice for the kids. Plates were passed. Conversation flowed. And Daniel felt like he was watching it all from underwater, everything muffled and distant. Finally, after the main course, his mother stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. I need everyone's attention for a moment, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Richard and I have something we need to tell you all. The table went quiet. All eyes turned to the head of the table where Daniel's mother and Richard stood side by side. This is difficult to say, his mother continued, but we've decided that honesty is more important than comfort. Richard and I are getting a divorce. The silence that followed was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. What? When did this happen? Are you serious? But you seemed fine. Richard raised his hands for quiet. We know this is a shock. We wanted to wait until after the weekend to tell everyone, but circumstances have changed. The truth is, we've been growing apart for some time. We care about each other deeply, but we're not in love. We haven't been for a while. We tried, Daniel's mother added. We really tried. We went to counseling, we read books, we did everything we were supposed to do, but sometimes trying isn't enough. Daniel's Aunt Margaret spoke up. What about the family? What about all of us? You're just giving up? We're not giving up, Richard said firmly. We're being honest, and we're ending things now while we can still be kind to each other before resentment builds into something ugly. More questions flew, more protests. James was looking around confused, not understanding what divorce meant but sensing the tension in the room. Daniel reached over and put a hand on his son's shoulder, grounding himself as much as offering comfort. Through it all, Evelyn sat perfectly still, her face pale, her eyes fixed on her plate. Finally, the furor died down enough for Daniel's mother to continue. We wanted you all to know because you're our family and we love you. The divorce will be final in a few months, but we're both committed to maintaining relationships with everyone. This doesn't have to mean the end of the family we've built. Just the end of your marriage, someone muttered. Richard ignored it. We're planning to split our time between our respective homes. The holidays will be different moving forward, but we'll figure it out together. Daniel's mother sat back down, looking exhausted. Richard followed suit. The table remained quiet, everyone processing the bomb that had just been dropped. And then Evelyn stood up. I have something to say too, she announced, her voice stronger than Daniel expected. His heart stopped. Every eye turned to her. She looked terrified but determined, her hands gripping the back of her chair. I know this isn't the best timing, she continued, but if we're doing honesty tonight, then I need to be honest about something too. She took a breath. Daniel and I, we're together. We have feelings for each other. We have for a long time. The silence this time was even worse. Daniel stood up beside her, his chair scraping against the floor. It's true. Evelyn and I, we've been in love since before our parents got married. We buried it because we thought it was the right thing to do. We spent 7 years pretending we couldn't stand each other so that my mother and Richard could have their happiness. But their marriage is ending, and we're done hiding. James was staring at him with wide eyes. Daddy, what's happening? I'll explain later, buddy. I promise. Aunt Margaret found her voice first. This is inappropriate. She's your stepsister. Not for much longer, Richard interjected. Once the divorce is final, there won't be any legal relationship between them. But it's weird. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Daniel said, and meant it. I've spent 7 years caring what people think, and it nearly destroyed us. I'm done with that. His mother was crying, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. I knew about both of them. I've known for years, and I did nothing because I was selfish, because I wanted my marriage more than I wanted my son's happiness. This is my fault. Mom, no! Yes, Danny, it is, and I'm so sorry. She looked at Evelyn. Both of you. I'm so sorry for what I put you through. Evelyn's eyes were wet. You didn't know. I should have. I should have seen what it was doing to you. More voices rose, some supportive, some scandalized, some just confused. Daniel's uncle was arguing with Aunt Margaret about moral relativism. One of the cousins was asking if this meant the family was breaking apart. James had started crying, overwhelmed by the emotion in the room. Daniel picked up his son, holding him close. It's okay, James. Everything's okay. But James was sobbing into his shoulder, frightened by the chaos, and Daniel felt his own resolve waver. What was he doing? Was this really worth upsetting his son like this? Then he felt a hand on his arm. Evelyn had moved around the table to stand beside him. James? She said softly. Can I tell you something? James peeked out from Daniel's shoulder, his face blotchy and wet. Your daddy and I, we're friends, good friends, and sometimes when grown-ups are really good friends, they become even more than friends. That's all that's happening. Nothing scary, nothing bad. Are you going to take Daddy away? James asked, his voice trembling. No, sweetie, never. Your daddy is always going to be your daddy first, always. I would never try to change that. James studied her face, trying to decide if he believed her. Then he looked at Daniel. Is she telling the truth? Yes, Daniel said firmly. You are the most important person in my life, James. That will never change. Evelyn doesn't take away from that. She adds to it. Like adding blocks to my castle? Despite everything, Daniel smiled. Yeah, buddy, just like that. James seemed to relax slightly. He was still unsure, still processing, but the terror had left his face. The table had gone quiet again, everyone watching the interaction. Richard stood up. I think we've all had enough drama for one night. Why don't we take a break? Get some air. Process things separately before we try to talk more. It was a good suggestion. People started standing, dispersing, taking the excuse to escape the tension. Aunt Margaret shot Daniel and Evelyn a disapproving look as she left the room. His mother came over, touching both of their arms. I meant what I said, she told them. I'm sorry, and I'm happy for you. Both of you. Thank you, Evelyn whispered. After his mother walked away, it was just the three of them, Daniel still holding James, Evelyn standing close. That went well, Evelyn said with dark humor. Could have been worse. Could it have? Daniel shifted James's weight. Let me get him to bed. He's exhausted. Of course. Evelyn touched James's back gently. Good night, James. Night, James mumbled. Daniel carried his son upstairs, grateful for the excuse to leave the aftermath. He helped James into his pajamas, tucked him into bed, and sat beside him in the dark. Daddy, James said sleepily, is everything going to be different now? Some things will be different, Daniel admitted, but not the important things. I'll still be your dad. You'll still have your room at my house and your room at Mom's house. You'll still see Grandma and Grandpa Richard. Nothing about that changes. What about Evelyn? What about her? Will she be around more? Daniel chose his words carefully. Maybe, if that's okay with you. She really likes you, you know. James was quiet for a moment. She's pretty. She is. And she knows about buildings. She does. I guess that's okay then. James yawned. Can she help me build stuff sometimes? Daniel felt something warm bloom in his chest. I bet she'd love that. Within minutes, James was asleep. Daniel sat there a while longer, watching his son breathe, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle around him like snow. He'd done it. They'd done it. The truth was out, and the world hadn't ended. When he finally went back downstairs, he found Evelyn alone on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. Hey, he said softly. She turned, and even in the darkness, he could see she'd been crying. Hey. James is asleep. I think he's going to be okay. Good. That's good. She wiped at her face. Your Aunt Margaret cornered me in the kitchen, told me I should be ashamed of myself, that I was destroying the family. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'll talk to her. Don't. It doesn't matter. It matters if she hurt you. She didn't say anything I haven't already thought myself. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter. 7 years, Daniel. We wasted 7 years for a marriage that was already over. We tortured ourselves for nothing. We didn't know. We should have known. We should have seen it. We should have been brave enough to ask the hard questions instead of just assuming we knew what was best for everyone. She turned to him, her eyes fierce. I'm so angry. At them? At us? At all of it. We lost so much time. Daniel stepped closer, pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face in his chest. I know, he murmured into her hair. I'm angry too. What if we can't get it back? What if too much damage has been done? Then we deal with it, together. What if I'm too broken? What if 7 years of hiding and pretending has ruined me for any kind of normal relationship? Then we'll be broken together. He pulled back to look at her. Evelyn, I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need normal. I just need you exactly as you are. She searched his face in the moonlight. This is really happening. We're really doing this. Yes, people are going to judge us. Let them. It's going to be complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. She laughed through her tears. When did you become so wise? About 5 hours ago, when I finally stopped being a coward. They stood there holding each other while the night deepened around them. Inside, they could hear the muffled sounds of family members getting ready for bed, doors closing, conversations fading. Tomorrow would bring more complications, more difficult conversations, more adjustments. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Daniel and Evelyn were exactly where they belonged, in each other's arms, finally free. Morning came too quickly, dragging Daniel from a sleep that had been thin and restless. He'd spent most of the night replaying the dinner conversation, analyzing every reaction, worrying about the fallout. When he finally opened his eyes to pale winter light filtering through the curtains, his first thought was that he'd dreamed the whole thing. Then he rolled over and saw Evelyn asleep beside him. Not in a different room, not on the opposite side of a pillow barrier. Right there, her dark hair spread across the white pillowcase, one hand tucked under her cheek. Real. She'd come to his room around 2 a.m, unable to sleep alone, needing the comfort of his presence. They'd talked for hours in whispers, processing everything, holding each other. Eventually exhaustion had won, and now it was morning, and the real world was waiting. Daniel slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her. He pulled on jeans and a sweater, checked on James, who was still deeply asleep in the adjoining room, then made his way downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for his mother, standing at the stove making coffee. She looked tired, older somehow than she had yesterday. When she heard him enter, she turned and offered a wan smile. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Not really. Daniel took a seat at the counter. How are you holding up? Oh, divorcing my second husband. Watching my son announce he's in love with my soon-to-be ex-stepdaughter. Just another Saturday. She poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across to him. Margaret left this morning at 5 a.m., made quite a show of it. Daniel's stomach tightened. Mom, I'm sorry. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize for being honest. Margaret has opinions about everything. She'll get over it or she won't. Either way, it's not your responsibility to manage her feelings. She's your sister, and you're my son. My priority. His mother sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. I've been thinking a lot since last night about the choices I made, about what I asked of you without even realizing I was asking. You didn't ask me to do anything, didn't I? When I married Richard, when I brought Evelyn into your life, I created an impossible situation. And instead of addressing it, instead of having the hard conversations, I let you suffer because it was easier for me. Daniel took a sip of coffee, letting the heat burn down his throat. You wanted to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. There is when it comes at my child's expense. She reached across the counter, taking his hand. I know you've spent your whole life trying to take care of me. Since your father died, you've been the one holding everything together, and I let you because I was drowning, and you were the only solid thing I could grab onto. Mom, let me finish. Her eyes were bright with tears. You were 17 when he died. 17? You should have been thinking about college and girls and what your life was going to look like. Instead, you were taking care of me, making sure I ate, making sure I got out of bed, sacrificing your own grief so you could manage mine. I wanted to help. I know you did, and that's what kills me. You've been so good, Danny, so selfless, but I taught you the wrong lesson. I taught you that love means disappearing, that being strong means never asking for what you need, that your happiness should always come second. Daniel felt his throat tighten. You were hurting. I couldn't just... Yes, you could have. You should have. A parent is supposed to take care of their child, not the other way around. She squeezed his hand. And then I did it again. I fell in love with Richard, and when I saw what was happening between you and Evelyn, I chose to be blind, because admitting it meant potentially losing my second chance at happiness. So I let you both bury yourselves alive. You didn't know. I knew enough. I knew you were pulling away from everyone. I knew Evelyn looked miserable every time we had family dinners. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't push because I didn't want to hear the answer. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm so sorry, Danny, for all of it. Daniel came around the counter and pulled her into a hug. She cried against his shoulder, 7 years of guilt and regret finally breaking through. It's okay, Mom, he murmured. It's going to be okay. Is it? I've made such a mess of everything. You fell in love. You tried to make it work. That's not a crime. But I hurt you in the process. And I made my own choices. Evelyn and I, we decided to hide. You didn't force us to do that. We did it to ourselves. His mother pulled back, wiping her eyes. Maybe. But you did it because you thought it was what I needed, what Richard and I needed. And that burden should never have been yours to carry. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking coffee, both lost in their own thoughts. Where do we go from here? Daniel finally asked. With the family, with everything. Forward, however messy that looks. His mother managed a small smile. Richard and I talked this morning. We're going to handle the divorce as amicably as possible, split assets fairly, figure out holidays, stay friends if we can. And us? Evelyn and me? You live your life, you love each other. You figure out what that looks like without worrying about what anyone else thinks. She took his hand again. Can I give you some advice? Of course. Don't rush. I know you've been waiting 7 years, and that feels like forever. But you both have healing to do. You need to learn how to be together without all the shame and hiding. Take your time. Build something real instead of just reacting to finally being free. Daniel nodded slowly. That's actually really good advice. I have my moments. She stood, stretching. Now, I'm going to take Richard some coffee and we're going to start making plans. You should probably check on James and Evelyn. Evelyn's still asleep in my room. His mother raised an eyebrow. Is she now? Nothing happened. We needed not to be alone. Danny, you don't have to explain yourself to me anymore. You're adults. What you do is your business. It was strange hearing that. After 7 years of hiding, of performing, the permission to just exist felt almost foreign, but also liberating. Daniel finished his coffee and headed back upstairs. James was starting to stir when he entered the bedroom. His son sat up, rubbing his eyes, looking confused about where he was. Morning, buddy, Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Morning, Daddy. James yawned. Is it time for pancakes? Soon. But first, I want to check in with you. About last night. About everything that happened. James's expression became more serious. Grandma and Grandpa Richard are getting divorced. That's right. What does divorced mean? It means they're not going to be married anymore. They'll live in different houses and see each other sometimes, but they won't be husband and wife. Like you and Mommy. Yeah, just like me and Mommy. James thought about this. And you like Evelyn now? Not like a sister. Like how you used to like Mommy? The question was so direct, so clear, that Daniel felt a wave of respect for his 5-year-old son. Yes, he said honestly, I like Evelyn very much, and she likes me too, but that doesn't change anything about you and me. You're still my number one. I know. James seemed to accept this easily. Can I still call Grandpa Richard Grandpa? Of course, he'll always be your grandpa. And Evelyn, what do I call her? Whatever you're comfortable with, just Evelyn is fine. Or Miss Evelyn if you want to be fancy. That made James giggle. She's not fancy. She builds buildings. She does indeed. Can she teach me to build buildings? I bet she'd love that. Daniel ruffled his son's hair. You're handling this really well, buddy. Better than the grown-ups, honestly. It's not that hard, Daddy. People like who they like. That's what Mommy says. Out of the mouths of children. Daniel hugged his son, feeling grateful for Michelle and the way she'd clearly been talking to James about relationships and feelings. She'd prepared him for this without even knowing it. Come on, Daniel said. Let's get dressed and see about those pancakes. While James was brushing his teeth, Daniel went back to his own room. Evelyn was awake now, sitting up in bed with her knees pulled to her chest. Morning, he said softly. Hi. She looked vulnerable in the morning light, her face bare of makeup, her hair tangled. I should probably go back to my room before James knows you're here. It's fine. What did you tell him? The truth. That we like each other, that nothing about his life is changing. He took it pretty well, actually. Evelyn smiled slightly. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Apparently, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. How are you feeling? Terrified, relieved, like I'm standing on the edge of something and I can't see the bottom. She reached for his hand. Is this real? Are we really doing this in the actual light of day? We're really doing this. What if we mess it up? What if after 7 years of fantasy, the reality doesn't live up to... Daniel kissed her, cutting off the spiral of anxiety. When he pulled back, she was staring at him with wide eyes. Stop overthinking, he said. We'll figure it out as we go. Together? Together. A knock on the door interrupted them. Richard's voice called through the wood. Daniel, Evelyn, family meeting in 20 minutes. Everyone needs to be there. We'll be down, Daniel called back. Evelyn took a shaky breath. Round 2. We survived round 1. Barely. But we survived. They got ready quickly, moving around each other in the small space with a familiarity that felt both new and ancient. When they came downstairs together, side by side, Daniel could feel the weight of eyes on them. The family had gathered in the living room. His mother and Richard sat together on one couch. James was on the floor with his cousins, playing with toy cars. Other relatives filled the remaining seats, their expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical. Aunt Margaret's chair was conspicuously empty. Thank you all for staying, Richard began. I know last night was difficult. A lot of information all at once. Your mother and I wanted to take some time this morning to answer questions and address concerns. Our main concern, Daniel's Uncle Tom spoke up, is that this family is falling apart. The family isn't falling apart, Daniel's mother said firmly. It's changing. That's different. Divorce and... Tom gestured vaguely at Daniel and Evelyn. Whatever this situation is, that's more than just change. What situation? Daniel asked, keeping his voice level. You mean me and Evelyn being honest about our feelings? I mean you two being involved when you're supposed to be siblings. We were never siblings, Evelyn interjected, her voice strong despite the slight tremor. We were 2 adults whose parents got married. That doesn't make us family in any biological or even meaningful sense. It makes you family in the eyes of society. Society can mind its own business, Richard said, surprising everyone. My daughter spent 7 years miserable because she was worried about what society would think. I'm not going to let her waste another day on that. So you approve of this? Tom looked genuinely shocked. I approve of my daughter being happy. I approve of Daniel being happy. They're both adults. They both deserve to live their lives without shame. What about the example this sets for the kids? Tom gestured at James and his cousins. Daniel felt his temper flare, but his mother spoke before he could. The example it sets is that honesty matters more than appearances, that love is worth fighting for, that families can take different shapes and still be families. She looked around the room. I know this is unconventional. I know some of you are uncomfortable, but Daniel and Evelyn have sacrificed enough. They buried themselves alive so Richard and I could have our marriage, and our marriage failed anyway. So if you want to be angry at someone, be angry at me for creating this situation in the first place, but leave them alone. The room fell silent. Finally, Daniel's cousin Sarah spoke up. I think it's brave. What they did, hiding for all those years to protect you two, and now choosing honesty even though it's hard. She smiled at Daniel and Evelyn. I'm happy for you both. Thank you, Evelyn said quietly. A few other relatives murmured agreement. Not everyone, but enough. Tom still looked disapproving, but he didn't argue further. Richard stood. I want to be clear about something. The divorce between your mother and me has nothing to do with Daniel and Evelyn. We were already ending our marriage before any of this came to light. They are not the reason we're splitting up. We are, because we were honest enough to admit we weren't in love anymore. When will the divorce be final? Someone asked. 3 to 4 months, depending on the paperwork. And then what? You two just go your separate ways. We maintain a friendship if possible. We handle holidays with grace. We support our children. Richard looked at Daniel's mother. We prove that endings don't have to be ugly. Daniel's mother nodded. We made a mistake getting married for the wrong reasons, but we can make the right choice in how we end things. The conversation continued for another hour. Logistics were discussed. Questions were answered. Slowly, the tension began to ease, not disappear, but soften. By the time people started dispersing, Daniel felt like he'd run a marathon. He found Evelyn in the kitchen, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. Hey, he said, coming up beside her. That was exhausting. Yeah. Your Uncle Tom hates us. He'll get over it. Will he? She turned to look at him. What if he doesn't? What if half the family decides we're some kind of scandal and they can't deal with us? Then that's their choice. We can't control what other people think, Evelyn. We can only control what we do. Very zen of you. I have my moments. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. We're going to be okay. This is going to be okay. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I want to believe that. Then believe it. They stood like that for a long moment, taking comfort in each other's presence. Outside, James's laughter echoed as he played in the snow with his cousins. Normal childhood sounds, life continuing despite the upheaval. I need to go back to the city tomorrow, Evelyn said eventually. I have a presentation on Monday, a big client. Daniel's chest tightened. Right, of course. Come with me. What? She pulled back to look at him. Come with me. You and James. Stay at my place for a few days. Let's see what this looks like in real life, not just in a cabin where everything's heightened and intense. Evelyn, I can't just... Why not? James is on winter break for another week. You work remotely half the time anyway. Come with me. Let's actually try this instead of just talking about it. It was crazy, impulsive, moving way too fast, and also exactly what Daniel wanted. Okay, he heard himself say. Yeah? Yeah. Let me talk to Michelle. Make sure she's okay with James being out of town for a few extra days. But yeah, let's do it. Evelyn's face lit up in a way that made Daniel's heart stutter. She kissed him, quick and fierce, right there in the kitchen where anyone could walk in. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being brave enough to try. That evening, after another family dinner that was significantly less dramatic than the previous night, Daniel called Michelle. He took the phone out to the porch, needing privacy for the conversation. Hey, she answered. How's the mountain? Eventful. Daniel took a breath. I need to tell you something about the family situation. He explained everything, the divorce, Evelyn, the 7 years of history, his plans to go to the city. He tried to be clear and honest, knowing that Michelle deserved the full truth, especially since it involved James. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Wow, Michelle finally said. That's a lot. I know. And I understand if you're uncomfortable with James being around this situation. I can bring him home instead of… Daniel, stop. Michelle's voice was gentle. I'm not uncomfortable. I'm actually kind of relieved. What? When we were married, there was always this part of you I couldn't reach. This wall. And I tried everything to get past it, but I never could. I blamed myself for a long time. Thought I wasn't enough. She paused. But it wasn't about me, was it? It was about her. Daniel felt shame burn through him. Michelle, I'm so sorry. You deserved better. I did. But I also knew what I was getting into. I knew you weren't fully there. I just thought I could change that. Which was naive. She sighed. The point is, I want you to be happy, Daniel, and I want James to see his father actually happy for once. If this woman is what does that for you, then I support it. You're being incredibly understanding. I'm being realistic. We're divorced. You're moving on. That's healthy. As long as James is safe and cared for, I don't have a problem with him spending time with your girlfriend. The word girlfriend felt strange applied to Evelyn. Too small for what she was. Thank you, Daniel said. Really, thank you. Just promise me something. If this gets serious, and it sounds like it already is, introduce me to her. I'd like to meet the woman who's going to be in my son's life. I promise. After they hung up, Daniel stood in the cold for a few minutes, processing the conversation. Michelle's grace, her understanding, made him feel both grateful and guilty. She really had deserved better than half of him. But now he had a chance to be whole, to be present, to stop hiding. He just had to be brave enough to actually do it. When he went back inside, he found Evelyn helping James with a puzzle. They were sitting on the floor together, James explaining his strategy while Evelyn listened with genuine interest. Watching them together made something in Daniel's chest expand painfully. This could be his life. This could be real. If he didn't screw it up. James looked up and saw him. Daddy? Evelyn's really good at puzzles. Is she? She found all the edge pieces in like 2 seconds. I had practice, Evelyn said, smiling at James. I used to do puzzles with my dad when I was your age. Can you help me with my room? James asked suddenly. Daddy said you build buildings. Can you help me make my room cooler? Evelyn glanced at Daniel, checking if this was okay. He nodded. I'd love to, she told James. What kind of cool things do you want in your room? A fort. And maybe a secret hiding spot, and lights that change colors. Those are all very buildable things. Evelyn was grinning now. We could design it together, draw plans and everything. James's eyes went wide. Really? Really. Daniel watched his son and the woman he loved bond over architecture and puzzle pieces, and felt hope bloom in his chest for the first time in 7 years. Maybe they really could make this work. Maybe the sacrifice, the waiting, the pain, maybe it had all been leading here, to this moment, to this possibility. Later that night, after James was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Daniel and Evelyn found themselves back on the porch. It had become their spot, the place where they could be honest without performance. We're leaving tomorrow, Evelyn said, her breath visible in the cold air. Back to real life. Back to real life, Daniel echoed. Are you scared? Terrified. Me too. She leaned against him. What if the magic only works here, in this cabin? What if we get back to the city and reality sets in and we realize, don't. Daniel turned her to face him. Don't catastrophize before we've even tried. It's what I do. I know, but try to trust this. Trust us. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. I've spent 7 years not trusting this. Not trusting us. It's hard to just turn that off. Then don't turn it off. Keep being cautious, keep questioning, but do it while we're actually together instead of from opposite corners. He cupped her face in his hands. We're going to mess this up sometimes. We're going to have arguments and misunderstandings and moments where we don't know what we're doing. But we'll figure it out together, okay? Okay, she whispered. They kissed under the stars, surrounded by snow and silence and the weight of 7 years finally lifting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The city, real life, the slow, difficult work of building something from the ruins of what they'd buried. But tonight, they had this. Each other. Finally, honestly, completely. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt like enough. The drive back to the city took 4 hours through landscape that gradually shifted from snow-covered mountains to gray urban sprawl. James sat in the back seat, alternating between asking questions about Evelyn's apartment and playing games on Daniel's phone. Evelyn drove her own car ahead of them, and Daniel found himself watching her taillights like a lifeline, afraid that if he lost sight of them, this fragile new reality would dissolve. By the time they pulled up to Evelyn's building in the downtown district, the sun was setting and Daniel's nerves were frayed. This was it. The transition from the cabin's isolated bubble into actual life, where neighbors could see them, where colleagues might ask questions, where everything became undeniably real. Evelyn's apartment was on the 12th floor, a converted loft with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It was beautiful in a way that spoke of careful design and attention to detail. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with architecture texts and novels. Her drafting table sat near the windows, covered in sketches and blueprints. "Wow," James breathed, running to the windows. "You can see everything." "Pretty cool, right?" Evelyn set down her bags, looking nervous. "The guest room is through there. I cleared out some space in the closet for your things." Daniel followed her gesture to a small bedroom that she'd clearly prepared for them. Fresh sheets on the bed, towels folded on the dresser, a small lamp that gave off warm light. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I wanted you to feel welcome." She was twisting her hands together, a nervous habit he'd noticed at the cabin. "I know this is weird, having you in my space. I've lived alone for 3 years, and I'm not great at sharing and—" Daniel kissed her, cutting off the anxious spiral. "It's perfect. Thank you." James came running back from the windows. "Can I see your building designs? Daddy said you make really cool buildings." Evelyn's face softened. "Sure. Want to see what I'm working on right now?" She led James to her drafting table, spreading out blueprints for what looked like a community center. James peppered her with questions, and Evelyn answered each one with patience and genuine enthusiasm. Watching them together, Daniel felt that same painful expansion in his chest. This could work. This really could work. That first week in the city was an exercise in adjustment. Daniel worked from Evelyn's dining table while she was at her office, taking conference calls and reviewing client proposals. James explored the neighborhood, delighted by the parks and the bakery on the corner that made chocolate croissants. Evenings were spent cooking dinner together, playing board games, establishing small routines that felt simultaneously foreign and right. But there were challenges, too. Evelyn was used to silence and solitude. James was 5 and loud and constantly in motion. Daniel found himself mediating, trying to give Evelyn space while also parenting his son, and the balancing act exhausted him. 3 days in, Evelyn came home from work tense and quiet. Daniel could see the stress in the set of her shoulders, the way she moved through the apartment with controlled precision. "Rough day?" he asked. Client rejected the entire design. 6 months of work just gone. She dropped her bag on the counter with more force than necessary. "I need to start over from scratch, and the presentation is in 2 weeks." "I'm sorry, that's brutal." "Yeah." She opened the fridge, stared at the contents without seeing them, then closed it again. "I think I need to be alone for a bit. Clear my head." Daniel understood. He really did. But James chose that moment to run into the room, holding up a drawing he'd made. "Evelyn, look, I drew your building, the one with the big windows." Evelyn's expression flickered, something between affection and frustration. "That's great, James. Can you show me later? I need a few minutes." "But I made it for you right now." "James," Daniel said gently, "let's give Evelyn some space, okay?" "But now, buddy." James's face crumpled. He dropped the drawing and ran to the guest room, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn pressed her fingers to her temples. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's okay. You're stressed. He'll understand. Will he? Because I feel like I just crushed a 5-year-old's feelings because I can't handle one bad day at work. You're allowed to have bad days. Not when there's a child in my apartment who doesn't deserve to deal with my moods. She looked at Daniel, and he saw fear in her eyes. Maybe this was a mistake. Moving too fast. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. We're figuring it out together, remember? Are we? Because it feels like you're handling everything perfectly, and I'm barely keeping my head above water. Daniel wanted to argue, to reassure her, but the truth was he'd been feeling the same strain. The constant negotiation between his role as a father and his desire to build something with Evelyn. The awareness that one wrong move could hurt his son or damage this fragile relationship. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Michelle's name flashed on the screen. I should take this, he said. He stepped into the guest room where James was lying on the bed, his drawing crumpled beside him. Daniel answered the phone while sitting next to his son, running a comforting hand through his hair. Hey, Michelle. Hey, just checking in. How's the city treating you guys? It's been good. Challenging, but good. He glanced at James, who was listening intently. James is having fun exploring Evelyn's neighborhood. Good. Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. My mom called. Apparently word has gotten around about your situation with Evelyn. Daniel's stomach dropped. What did she say? Nothing terrible. Just that people are talking. Your Aunt Margaret has been sharing her opinions, let's say. Of course she has. I told my mom that it's none of their business, that you and Evelyn are adults making your own choices. But I thought you should know that the gossip mill is churning. Thanks for the warning. How's it really going? With you and her? Daniel looked through the doorway at Evelyn, who was now standing at the windows, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. Honestly? It's harder than I expected. We spent 7 years avoiding each other, and now we're trying to build a relationship while also integrating James into the equation. It's a lot. Relationships are always a lot, especially at the beginning. Michelle paused. But if you love her, and I think you do, it's worth the work. You're being very generous about all this. I'm being realistic. I saw how you were when we were married, Daniel. You were present, but not really there. And now, talking to you, I can hear the difference. You're actually engaged, alive, even when you're stressed. After they hung up, Daniel lay down next to James on the bed. Is Evelyn mad at me? James asked quietly. Nobody. She's just having a hard day. Sometimes grown-ups need space to feel their feelings. Like when you get quiet after I go to bed? Daniel was surprised by his son's perceptiveness. Yeah, kind of like that. Do you love Evelyn, Daddy? The question was so direct, so honest, that Daniel felt his breath catch. Yes, he said. I do. Is she going to be my new mom? No, you already have a mom. Michelle is your mom, and she always will be. Evelyn is someone special who's in our lives now. Someone I care about very much. James thought about this. Can I have 2 special people? Mommy and Evelyn? You can have as many special people as your heart has room for. My heart has a lot of room. James rolled over to look at him. I think Evelyn's heart is small right now because she's sad. We should make it bigger. Daniel pulled his son close, amazed as always by the wisdom of children. How do we do that? We be extra nice to her and give her hugs. Hugs make hearts bigger. That's a pretty good plan, buddy. They went back out to the living room together. Evelyn was still at the window, but she turned when she heard them approach. I'm sorry, James, she said immediately. I should have looked at your drawing. That was rude of me. James walked over and held up the crumpled paper. It's okay. You were having a small heart day. Daddy and me have those too. Evelyn's eyes went bright with tears. She crouched down to James's level. A small heart day. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Can I give you a hug to make your heart bigger? Evelyn looked at Daniel over James's head, and he saw something break open in her expression. She nodded, and James wrapped his small arms around her neck. Thank you, she whispered. This helps a lot. When James ran back to the guest room to get his other drawings, Evelyn stood and faced Daniel. "I'm sorry I freaked out," she said. It's so different from what I'm used to. Living alone, controlling my space, not having to consider anyone else's needs." "I know, and I'm sorry for bringing chaos into your carefully ordered life." "I don't want you to be sorry. I want this. I want you and James here. I just don't know how to do it without feeling like I'm failing constantly." Daniel crossed to her, taking her hands. "You're not failing. You had a bad day and needed space. That's normal. And James is fine. Kids are resilient." "He shouldn't have to be resilient because I can't handle my emotions." "Evelyn, you're being too hard on yourself. This is a learning process for all of us." She leaned her forehead against his chest. "What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I'm too selfish, too set in my ways?" "Then we'll figure it out. Together. Like we keep saying we will. You keep having to talk me off ledges. And you keep having to deal with a 5-year-old's boundless energy in your quiet apartment. We're both adjusting." She pulled back to look at him. "I want to be good at this. At us. At being part of James's life. You already are. He adores you. He barely knows me. So let him get to know you. The real you. Including the parts that need space sometimes and have small heart days." Evelyn managed a small smile. Small heart days. I'm stealing that. That night, after James was asleep, they sat together on the couch with glasses of wine, finally talking about the real fears that had been hovering around the edges. "My presentation is on Monday," Evelyn said, "the one for the community center, and I'm terrified I'm going to fail." "You won't. You don't know that." "No, but I know you. I've watched you work. You're brilliant at what you do." "I used to be brilliant. Before I spent 7 years distracted and emotionally unavailable and designing buildings while pretending half my life didn't exist." Daniel set down his wine glass. "Is that what you think? That hiding from us made you less good at your job?" "I know it did. I can see it in my work from those years. Everything was technically perfect but soulless, like I'd designed the structure but forgotten the humanity. And now? Now I'm terrified that I've forgotten how to access that humanity. That 7 years of shutting down has permanently damaged my ability to create something real." Daniel understood that fear intimately. "I felt the same way about marriage, about relationships, like I'd locked away so much of myself that I'd never be able to be fully present with someone." "And?" Evelyn looked at him. "Do you still feel that way?" "Honestly? Sometimes. I catch myself retreating into old patterns, hiding my emotions, pretending everything's fine when it's not." He took her hand. "But then I remember that I'm allowed to be honest now, that you're not going anywhere if I admit I'm struggling. What if I do go somewhere? What if this gets too hard and I run? Then I'll be devastated. But at least we tried. At least we stopped hiding." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what they'd admitted. "I have something to tell you," Evelyn said finally. "And I'm terrified of how you'll react." Daniel's heart rate picked up. "Okay. I've been offered a position in Seattle, lead architect on a major urban development project. It's everything I've ever wanted professionally." The words hit like a physical blow. "When did you find out?" 2 weeks ago, right before the cabin trip. "And you didn't tell me?" "Because I didn't know what we were. I didn't know if we'd ever be honest about our feelings. And I was planning to take it, to move across the country and start over and try to forget about you for the 800th time." Daniel stood, needing to move, needing to process. "Are you still planning to take it?" "I don't know." Her voice was small. "It's an incredible opportunity, the kind of thing that could define my career. But it would mean leaving you, again, for real this time." "When do you have to decide?" "End of the month." 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks to figure out if what they had was worth her turning down the opportunity of a lifetime. "I need some air," Daniel said. He grabbed his coat and went out onto the balcony, despite the cold. The city stretched out below him, thousands of lights, millions of lives, everyone dealing with their own impossible choices. He heard the sliding door open behind him. Evelyn joined him at the railing, wrapped in a blanket. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "Yeah." You should have. I was scared. I'm still scared. Of what? Of choosing you and then losing you anyway. Of turning down Seattle and resenting you for it. Of taking Seattle and spending the rest of my life wondering what if. She turned to him. 7 years, Daniel. We wasted 7 years. And now I finally have you, and I might have to choose between you and my career, and I don't know how to do that. Daniel wanted to tell her to stay, to choose him, to choose them. But he thought about his mother's advice, about not rushing, about building something real instead of just reacting. Don't decide tonight, he said. Take the time you have. Really think about what you want. What do you want? I want you, but not if it means you give up your dreams and end up resenting me. I've been in a relationship where someone settled. I won't do that again. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm not settling with you. Aren't you? If you turn down Seattle, if you stay here because of us, how long before you start wondering about what you gave up? You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what you really want, not what you think you should want, not what's convenient. What do you actually want for your life? She turned away, staring out at the city. I don't know, and that terrifies me. They stood in the cold for a long time, not touching, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Evelyn went inside. Daniel stayed on the balcony, watching the city breathe, and wondered if 7 years of waiting had only brought them to another impossible choice. The next few days were strained. Evelyn threw herself into preparing for her presentation. Daniel kept James occupied, giving her space, trying not to think about Seattle and what it would mean if she left. They moved around each other carefully, politely, like strangers again. The night before her presentation, Evelyn didn't come to bed. Daniel found her at 3 a.m, still at her drafting table, surrounded by crumpled sketches. You need to sleep, he said gently. I can't. Nothing's working. Every design feels flat. She looked up at him, exhausted. I think I'm going to fail tomorrow. I think I'm going to stand in front of those clients and prove that I've lost whatever made me good at this. Daniel pulled up a chair beside her. Can I see what you're working on? She slid the blueprints toward him. He studied them, not with an architect's eye. He didn't have that skill, but with attention, with care. What's the building supposed to do? He asked. It's a community center, a place for people to gather, to connect, to build relationships. And what have you designed? A box? A functional, boring box with rooms and windows and all the technical requirements, but no soul. Daniel looked at the blueprints again, then at Evelyn. What if you're designing the wrong thing? What do you mean? You're designing for function, for requirements, but you just said it's supposed to be about connection, about relationships. He pointed to the central atrium she'd sketched. What if instead of making this a pass-through space, you made it the heart? What if everything else radiated from here, from this central place where people actually gather? Evelyn stared at the blueprints, then at him. That's actually brilliant. I have my moments. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and started sketching, her hand moving quickly now, ideas flowing. Daniel watched her work, saw the life come back into her face, and felt a pang of understanding. This was what she needed, this creative fire, this sense of purpose. He couldn't ask her to give that up, even for him. The presentation the next day went well, better than well. Evelyn called Daniel afterward, her voice bright with excitement. They loved it. They actually loved it. They're moving forward with the design and they want me to lead the entire project. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Daniel, I couldn't have done it without you. Last night when you helped me see what was missing, you saved me. You saved yourself. I just asked a question. When she came home that evening, she was glowing. James ran to hug her and she swept him up, laughing. We should celebrate, she said. All of us. Let's go somewhere special. They went to a small Italian restaurant near the apartment. James ordered spaghetti and made a mess. Evelyn told them about the presentation, about the client's reaction, about what the project could mean for her career. Daniel watched her shine and tried to memorize this moment, because he knew what was coming. Later, after James was asleep, Evelyn came to find Daniel on the balcony. It had become his thinking spot, his place to process difficult truths. We need to talk, she said. I know. She stood beside him, both of them looking out at the city. "I've been thinking about Seattle, about what you said, about being honest with myself." Daniel's chest tightened, but he stayed quiet. "The truth is, part of me wants to run, to take the job and start over somewhere new, because that's what I've always done when things get complicated. I've run." She turned to him. "But I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what if. What if I'd been brave enough to stay? What if I'd chosen you?" "Evelyn, let me finish. I'm turning down Seattle. I'm staying here. Not because I'm settling, not because I'm giving up my dreams, but because my dreams are changing. Because I want to build a life with you and James. Because I've spent 7 years running from the thing I wanted most, and I'm done running." Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified, but yes, I'm sure." She took his hands. "The community center project, it's going to be huge for my career, and there will be other opportunities, but there's only one you, only one James, only one chance at this. What if you regret it? What if I don't?" She smiled through her own tears. "What if this is exactly what I'm supposed to do? What if choosing you is the bravest thing I've ever done?" Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling 7 years of weight finally, completely lift. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you so much." "I love you too, and I love James, and I want to do this for real, build a life together, figure out how to be a family." They stood there holding each other while the city glittered below them, and Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of challenges or complications, but the deep knowing that they were facing them together. The next morning, Daniel called his mother. "How are things?" she asked. "Good. Really good, actually. Evelyn turned down a job in Seattle. She's staying." "That's wonderful, Danny. I'm so happy for you both. How are you doing with the divorce?" "It's surprisingly amicable. Richard and I had coffee yesterday. We talked about the good times, acknowledged the mistakes, and agreed to stay friends. It's possible to end something with grace, it turns out." "I'm glad. I've been thinking a lot about what I said at the cabin, about teaching you the wrong lessons about love, and I want to say it again, properly. I'm sorry for making you think that sacrifice and self-erasure were the same as love. They're not. Love is showing up honestly, being present, choosing each other even when it's hard." "I'm learning that," Daniel said, slowly. "Keep learning and keep choosing her. Keep choosing yourself. That's how you build something real." After they hung up, Daniel found Evelyn and James in the kitchen making pancakes. James was covered in flour. Evelyn was laughing, trying to wipe his face with a towel. "Daddy, we're making breakfast!" "I can see that." Daniel joined them, kissing Evelyn's cheek, ruffling James's hair. This was his life now. Real. Messy. Complicated. Perfect. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Richard and Daniel's mother signed the papers with mutual respect and genuine affection. They promised to stay in touch, to handle holidays with grace, to support their children, and they kept that promise. Daniel and Evelyn took things slowly after that. No rushing, no grand gestures, just the steady daily work of building something real. Evelyn started spending more time at Daniel's place, getting to know James's routines, learning how to navigate the rhythms of co-parenting with Michelle. Michelle and Evelyn met for coffee one afternoon, a meeting Daniel had been nervous about, but that turned out to be surprisingly positive. "She's good for you," Michelle told him afterward, "and she's kind to James. That's all I need to know." Evelyn's community center project became the cornerstone of her portfolio. She won awards, got featured in architecture magazines. And through it all, she came home to Daniel and James. Some family members still had opinions. Aunt Margaret never quite came around. But most people adjusted, accepted, moved forward. Because that's what families do. They adapt. 1 year after the cabin, on a cold winter evening, Daniel proposed. Not with fanfare or public spectacle, just the two of them on her balcony, the city spread out below. "I know we said we'd take things slow," he said, the ring box in his hand. "But I've waited long enough. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Evelyn looked at the ring, then at him, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. Yes, absolutely yes. They told James the next morning over breakfast. Are you going to be my stepmom? He asked Evelyn. I'm going to be your Evelyn, she said, just like I am now, but officially part of the family. Cool. Can we have cake at the wedding? Definitely cake. The wedding was small, just close family and friends. His mother walked Daniel down the aisle, tears in her eyes. Richard gave Evelyn away, beaming with pride. James was the ring bearer and took his job very seriously. And when Daniel and Evelyn said their vows, they meant every word. Not the traditional promises about richer and poorer, sickness and health, but their own vows about honesty, about showing up, about choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. At the reception, Daniel's mother pulled him aside. I'm so proud of you, she said. You did the hard thing. You chose honesty, and look what you built. Daniel looked across the room at Evelyn, who was dancing with James, both of them laughing. I almost lost this, he said. 7 years of hiding. I almost lost everything. But you didn't. You found your way back. We found our way back, he corrected, together. That night, after the wedding, after everyone had left, Daniel stood on the balcony of their hotel room. Evelyn came to join him, still in her wedding dress. What are you thinking about? She asked. About how we got here. All the choices that led to this moment. Regrets? Not anymore. He pulled her close. I used to think sacrifice was the same as love. That hiding myself, diminishing myself, was how you showed you cared. But you taught me different. You taught me that real love is showing up honestly, being seen, choosing truth even when it's terrifying. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. We taught each other. We both had to learn how to stop hiding. They stood there in the quiet, two people who'd spent 7 years buried alive, finally breathing free. What do you think James will remember about all this? Evelyn asked. When he's older? I hope he remembers that his dad was honest, that we didn't teach him love requires self-erasure, that we showed him what it looks like to choose truth even when it's complicated. That's a good legacy. It's the only one that matters. The city glittered below them, full of other people's stories, other impossible choices, other lives being lived in the spaces between hiding and truth. And Daniel Cross, single father who'd spent 7 years pretending, held his wife close and chose honesty. Again, and again, and again. For the rest of his life. Because that's what real love demanded. Not sacrifice, not self-erasure, but the daily courageous choice to show up as exactly who you were. Messy, flawed, human, honest. And in that honesty, Daniel finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not a perfect ending, but a real one. A true one. A better one.